There is a room in the house of domestic violence that most people never open. A room where the walls hum differently, where the lights flicker in patterns only some minds can read, where the air itself feels too loud. This is the room where neurodivergent survivors live, autistic survivors, ADHD survivors, survivors with sensory processing differences, learning disabilities, dyslexia, dyspraxia, Tourette's, OCD, bipolar, PTSD, and combinations that don't fit neatly into any diagnostic box. This room is not small, it is simply ignored. And today, we open that door. Neurodivergence is not a flaw. It is a difference in how the brain processes the world, how it senses, organizes, communicates, and responds. But in the hands of an abuser, difference becomes a weapon because abusers look for vulnerabilities and society hands them a map. Neurodivergent survivors often face communication differences that get twisted into defiance or lying, sensory sensitivities that get mocked or exploited, executive function challenges that get used to paint them as unreliable, emotional regulation differences that get labeled as overreacting, stemming shutdowns, meltdowns that can get used as evidence of instability, and masking that hides the abuse until the survivor collapses. And the world, untrained and unprepared, often believes the abuser's story first. Domestic violence is not one story. It is 1,000 tactics braided together. But for neurodivergent survivors, the braid has extra strands. Sensory-based abuse. Some abusers weaponize the senses. Loud noises during arguments, flickering lights, touching without warning, withholding sensory tools, mocking stems or routines, using sensory overload as punishment. For a neurotypical person, this is unpleasant. For a neurodivergent person, it can be physically painful, disorienting, and even incapacitating. Communication manipulation. Many neurodivergent people communicate differently, literally, or with unique pacing. Abusers twist this into "you're being rude," "you're not listening," "you're lying," "you're confusing me on purpose," "you're too emotional," "you're not emotional enough." The survivor begins to doubt their own voice. Weaponizing executive function. Tasks like organizing, planning, remembering, or switching focus can be harder for neurodivergent people. Abusers exploit this by setting impossible expectations, changing rules constantly, punishing forgetfulness, calling them lazy, messy, or childish, using overwhelm as a control tactic. The survivors become trapped in a maze with moving walls. Isolation through misunderstanding. Neurodivergent survivors are often already isolated by social stigma, misdiagnosis, being misunderstood by family, difficulty forming or maintaining relationships, burnout, and masking fatigue. Abusers capitalize on this isolation, convincing the survivor that no one else will understand them. Gaslighting through ableism. Ableism becomes a tool of control. No one will believe you. You are too sensitive. You can't live on your own. You need me to function. Your disability makes you unstable. This is not just gaslighting. It is systemic gaslighting, reinforced by the world that often doubts neurodivergent voices. This is not because neurodivergent people are weak. It is because society is unprepared. There's a higher dependence on routines. Abusers exploit routine-based living by disrupting it or controlling it. Difficulty reading social danger. Some neurodivergent people struggle with recognizing manipulation, interpreting tone, and detecting hidden motives. Abusers exploit this clarity and honesty. Masking as survival. Masking, hiding one's natural behaviors, is already exhausting. In an abusive home, masking becomes a full-time job, and the survivor burns out faster. Barriers to reporting. Neurodivergent survivors often fear not being believed, being misunderstood, being dismissed as dramatic or confused, losing custody, being institutionalized, being blamed for their own trauma responses. These fears are not imaginary. They are lived experiences. This is where the story widens. Because domestic violence does not happen in a vacuum. It happens in a society that often misunderstands neurodivergence. Law enforcement officers may interpret flat affect as lack of emotion, stimming as aggression, shutdowns as noncompliance, meltdowns as instability, and literal communication as evasiveness. This can lead to wrongful arrests, misplaced blame, or complete dismissal of the survivor's report. And in courtrooms, they rely on eye contact, appropriate emotional expression, quick responses, linear storytelling. Neurodivergent survivors may struggle with these expectations, and abusers often appear more composed, more credible, more reasonable. Shelters are not sensory friendly. They may be loud, crowded, bright, chaotic, overstimulating. Some survivors leave shelters not because they want to return to abuse, but because the environment is unbearable. And mental health systems. Neurodivergence is often misdiagnosed as borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, anxiety, and depression. And when the abuse is disclosed, professionals sometimes blame the neurodivergence instead of the abuser. The emotional landscape of neurodivergent survivors is where the spoken word heartbeat begins. Because neurodivergent survivors often feel too much, too little, too fast, too slow, too honest, too confused, too intense, too quiet, too different. And the world tells them these differences are the problem. But the truth is this: their difference are not the danger. The abuser is, the system is, and the silence is. Healing is not linear. It is not tidy. It is not neurotypical. For neurodivergent survivors, healing may look like rebuilding routines, reclaiming stems, relearning sensory safety, unmasking slowly, finding communication that feels natural, releasing shame around shutdowns or meltdowns, rebuilding executive function without fear, creating environments that support their brain, finding community that understands their wiring. Healing is not about becoming normal. It is about becoming free. Support must be tailored, not standardized. Sensory safe environments, quiet rooms, dim lights, weighted blankets, noise reducing options, and predictable spaces. Communication respect, pauses, literal language, written communication, alternative communication methods, and time to process. Trauma-informed plus neurodiversity-informed care. Professionals must understand both, not one, not the other, both. Advocacy in court. Survivors need accommodations, clear questions, extra processing time, permission to stem, support persons, and judges trained in neurodiversity. Community education, because the world cannot protect what it refuses to understand. Neurodivergent survivors are not fragile. They are not broken. They are not too much or too confusing. They are survivors who endured abuse in a world not built for their minds and still found ways to adapt, to mask, to cope, to endure, to survive. This is not weakness. That is brilliance. Talk about domestic violence when we build shelters, when we train courts, and when we educate communities, we must open the door to that room and say, we see you. We believe you. Your brain is not the problem. The violence is. And you deserve safety, support, and a world that understands your wiring. Because neurodivergent survivors are not the exception. They are part of the story, and it is time the story finally includes them.